without a net. We have 3 left. A mind split into pieces. The first thing that comes to mind for this is what Robert J. Lifton has called doubling, and also what he's called splitting, where you could have someone who is a perfectly nice father and perfectly nice husband, not abusive, who would then go to work at a death camp. And they would split off and separate the home life from the work life. And there have been torturers who have done the same thing. And not to say the people who worked at death camps weren't torturers. And he also discussed the people who build nuclear weapons. And they can be perfectly nice people, perfectly wonderful friends, and they're building these weapons of these massive weapons. And he talks extensively over many of his books about that process of splitting off. And you can have people who claim to love the forest, and you probably do love the forest, and they're loggers and they're cutting it down. And there's that same split. And one of the ways this split, one of the things, many things that causes this split is a system where you make money by destroying things. So you make money by cutting down trees. You make money by catching all the fish. And you may love being out on the ocean, and you may love fish, not just to eat, but to exist. And, you know, you'll still catch them and sell them and won't think much about it. And there's that split. Another thing that a mind split into pieces makes me think of is that schizophrenic, the root means split off, and it's like schism. And in fact, the root of science, the word science, comes from the word split. And as of the 14th century or so, what science meant is a state or fact of knowing what's known, knowledge. And it was from a Latin, scientia, or scientia maybe, knowledge and knowing, expertness. But if you go further back, the original notion in the Latin verb probably is to separate one thing from another, to distinguish. And it's related to scindere, to cut, divide, from the Greek schizine, to split, rend, cleave. And I just find it really interesting that the root of schizophrenia is also the same root, ultimately, of science. And I understand that they're coming at it from different directions in some ways, because, you know, a lot of knowledge is simply making distinctions. You know, that's what science is. It's making distinctions between the color red and the color blue. It's making distinctions between a cannonball falling and a feather falling, and figuring out why there are those differences. But also, science is notorious for splitting off from the real world. And that's what an experiment is. An experiment is where you abstract yourself from the real world, reduce all the variables to one if you can, and then you do your experiment, and then you regeneralize back out into the world. And that's a fine way of learning things. That's one way to gain knowledge. And the problem is that it can lead to what has been called instrumental thinking, which is where you are only attempting, you ignore. Okay, I love the word rationalize, because it means, you know, the way we use it in the vernacular is, you know, rationalizing bad behavior. I did it because of this and this and this. But there's another meaning to the word rationalize, which is to remove all considerations except for the matter at hand. And one example of that would be that if I'm looking at two heads of lettuce and I only care about price, one of them is going to be, well, I know how much cabbage is not lettuce. So a head of cabbage is going to be $2.50, and another head of cabbage is going to be $5, and it's because the other one's organic. And if my consideration is only the cost, then I'm ignoring everything else. And that's in fact how the entire market works, is by externalizing costs everywhere. That's how we can get all these cheap materials, because we split off everything else. And that's how they can destroy forests everywhere, is because they split off. They say, all we care about is the board feet of timber. All we care about is getting that out. All of the lives in the forest matter nothing to them. They've split them off. And that sort of instrumental thinking is one of the things that's killing the planet. And another way to say this is that you're externalizing costs. And part of the problem is that, I mean, that's just one direction to go with a mind split into pieces. Another direction to go with this has to do with, for example, social media, which is reducing our span of attention dramatically. And it's because we're split off. It's like, I'm not just at the same time, except they don't call it splitting a mind into pieces, they call it multitasking. And so I can be simultaneously looking at Facebook and playing a game and working on a book. And I got to tell you, I'm not going to get as much done as if I'm just working on a book. And you know, another thing this makes me think of is something that Joseph Campbell said, which is people of all ages until the present, he wrote this in the 40s or 50s, people of all ages until the present have understood that to have anything approaching a spiritual life, the first requirement is some leisure. And that's because if you have time to sit in the sun, and if you have time to meander through the forest, you have time for your mind to stop that splitting and to settle down and to slow down and to... Another way to say this is a line from the Mary Stuart Merlin series from the 70s. She had this great line, "The God will not speak to those who have no time to listen." And I think if our mind is split and if our attention is split, it's, well, another way to say this is I recently got a couple puppies, and ever since then, I've been so busy making sure, don't pee on the floor, don't poop on the floor, let's gotta take you out for a walk. And I've gotten a lot less writing done because my mind has kind of been split into pieces on this. And I mean, I adore the puppies, they're wonderful. But I don't know if you experience this, but I experience this a lot, that I feel like I can easily do X number of things in my life. And then when I add one more thing, everything falls apart. So I can write at the same time that I'm doing my interviews, at the same time I'm doing some classes. That's all fine. But then if my dryer craps out and I need to deal with that as well, like, then everything falls apart. And so what am I saying? I'm saying that there are powerful motivators for us to have our minds split into pieces. And one of the motivators is that we're living in an incredibly destructive culture. And in order to get through the day, you have to break off and you have to ignore the fact that you are participating in the murder of the planet, you know, however small one's individual role may be. And that's one of the ways that we split off. And another way we split off is, it's kind of a different subject, but another way we split off is through having so much input given at us. It's like right now you can listen to me talk, and then 5 minutes from now you can watch an episode of Better Call Saul, and then 5 minutes later you can watch a baseball game. You can bounce all over the world very quickly. And where do we remain? And I guess the last thing I want to say about this is that I've always loved the word integrity. And integrity can certainly mean, sort of standing firm in one's beliefs and having integrity. But what it really means is wholeness, and it's being integral. And I think we get pulled in so many directions, and it can be really hard to attempt to maintain any sort of integration in the face of this rampant splitting.